My name is Vincent Harlow, and I've been maintaining St. Matthias Episcopal Church in Ashford, Vermont for 16 years. Before that, I worked commercial HVAC for a decade, so I know my way around boilers, electrical systems, and the particular quirks of old buildings. St. Matthias was built in 1847, a Gothic revival structure with a bell tower that rises 112 feet above the village green. The building has its eccentricities: settling foundation, drafty nave, temperamental organ, but nothing I couldn't handle. I've replaced plumbing, rewired sections of the basement, patched the slate roof more times than I can count. I know every creaking board, every cold spot, every place where the wind whistles through gaps in the stonework. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not someone who spooks easily. I'm methodical. I document everything. I keep maintenance logs going back to my first week on the job. When something breaks, I fix it. When something seems off, I investigate until I find the cause. That's how I've always approached this work. Christmas has always been the busiest time of year at St. Matthias. We hold services on Christmas Eve at 5 and 10, then a morning service on Christmas Day at 9. Between the decorations, the additional heating demands, the increased foot traffic, and the inevitable minor crises, a blown fuse here, a clogged toilet there, I'm usually on site for most of the holiday period. I don't mind. My ex-wife has the kids for Christmas, and honestly, I prefer having something to do. The church pays me holiday rates, and there's something peaceful about being in that building when it's empty. The stained glass filtering winter light, the smell of pine garland and candle wax, the silence. This particular Christmas fell on a Sunday in 2019. The forecast had been calling for a significant winter storm. 8 to 14 inches of snow. Winds gusting to 40 miles per hour. Temperatures dropping into the single digits. By Friday the 23rd, Reverend Patricia Clemens made the decision to cancel the Christmas Day service. The Christmas Eve services would go on as planned, but she didn't want to risk people driving in blizzard conditions on Christmas morning. I agreed with the call. Vermont winters are nothing to play around with. Christmas Eve proceeded normally. The 5 o'clock family service was packed, standing room only. Kids in new Christmas dresses and clip-on ties. Parents trying to corral them, the whole cheerful chaos of it. I stayed in the background, monitoring the heating system and making sure the emergency exits stayed clear. The 10 o'clock service was more subdued. Candlelight, traditional carols, communion. Beautiful in its way. By 11:30, the last parishioners had filtered out into the snowy night. Reverend Clemens thanked me, wished me a Merry Christmas, and headed home to her family. I did my usual post-service walkthrough, checked that all the candles were extinguished, made sure no one had left the bathrooms running, confirmed all the exterior doors were locked. The storm was picking up outside, wind rattling the old windows, snow already accumulating in heavy drifts against the north wall. I adjusted the thermostat down to 55 degrees for the night. No point heating the whole building when no one would be there. The boiler was running fine, no unusual noises or smells. Before I left, I went down to the basement to check the main electrical panel one last time. St. Matthias has had some issues with circuit overloads during high demand periods, and I wanted to make sure everything looked good after running the lights and sound system all evening. The basement is unfinished, exposed stone walls, concrete floor, the old coal room that we use for storage now. It's always cold down there, always smells like damp earth and heating oil. I've never liked spending more time in it than necessary, but not because it's creepy. It's just uncomfortable. The panel looked fine. All the breakers were in position. No signs of arcing or burning. I made a note in my log, 12:24, 11:47 p.m. Post-service check complete. All systems normal. Building secured. Then I shut off the basement lights, climbed the stairs, locked the basement door, and headed out through the side entrance we use for staff access. The parking lot was empty, except for my truck. Snow was coming down hard, fat flakes swirling in the amber glow of the streetlights. I spent 10 minutes brushing off my truck and scraping the windows. By the time I got the engine started and the heat running, it was past midnight. Officially Christmas Day. I live about 4 miles from the church, a small house on the outskirts of Ashford. The roads were already getting bad. Maybe 3 inches of accumulation, more coming down steadily. I took it slow, arrived home around 12:30. I made myself a sandwich, watched the late news, and went to bed around 1:15. The wind was howling outside, rattling my bedroom window in its frame. I remember thinking I'd probably need to shovel twice tomorrow, once in the morning and once after the storm passed. Then I fell asleep. I woke to the sound of church bells. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But as I surfaced into full consciousness, the sound continued. Deep, resonant, rhythmic. The unmistakable tone of St. Matthias's bells. I lay there in the dark, confused. My alarm clock read 3:47 a.m. The bells kept ringing, not randomly, a pattern. The pattern we use for calling people to service. 4 bells in the tower, rung in sequence, creating that cascading peal that carries across the village. I sat up, fully awake now, listening. The storm was still raging outside. Through my window, I could see nothing but darkness and blowing snow. But the bells continued, clear and distinct despite the wind. My first thought was the storm had somehow triggered them. We have an electronic bell system installed in 1998, replacing the old rope and wheel mechanism. It's controlled by a programmable timer in the sacristy. Maybe a power surge had activated it. But that didn't make sense. The timer was set for specific times. Before services, noon on Sundays, that sort of thing. It wasn't programmed for 3:47 a.m. on Christmas. And besides, there was no reason it would turn itself on. Still, equipment malfunctions happen. Something in the storm, lightning, a transformer problem, could have caused it. I got dressed, pulling on thermal underwear, jeans, a heavy sweater. I called the church office number, thinking maybe the security system had notified Reverend Clements, and she was already aware. The call went to voicemail. I tried her cell. Same thing. I tried Walter Sims, the head of the parish council, voicemail. At 3 a.m. on Christmas during a blizzard, no one was answering their phones. The bells were still ringing. I stood in my living room, listening, trying to decide what to do. I could let it go, wait until morning, deal with it when the storm passed. But the bells were loud. Loud enough that people in the village center could definitely hear them. Someone might call the police thinking there was an emergency. Or worse, someone might think we were calling people to a service that didn't exist and try to drive to the church in this weather. That was a safety issue. I put on my boots, my heavy coat, my hat and gloves. I grabbed my keys and my flashlight and headed out to my truck. The wind hit me like a physical force the moment I opened my door. The snow was coming down so hard I could barely see across my yard. The drifts were past my knees in places. I had to dig out my truck again, clearing the snow that had piled up around it in the past few hours. The drive back to St. Matthias took almost 20 minutes, even though it's usually a 5-minute trip. Visibility was near zero. I followed the road more by memory and feel than by sight, going maybe 10 miles an hour, my hazards blinking. I didn't see another vehicle. No one else was out in this. The village was dark, houses shuttered against the storm. Only the church stood out, its silhouette barely visible through the snow. And the bells kept ringing. I pulled into the church parking lot, parked as close to the side entrance as I could manage. The snow was deeper here. The wind created strange drifting patterns around the building, piling snow 10 feet high against some walls, while leaving other areas almost bare. I fought my way to the door, the bells echoing above me, sonorous and steady. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the side door. From cold or from something else, I'm not sure. The door was crusted with ice and took some effort to pull open. I stepped inside, into the dark hallway that leads past the administrative offices toward the nave. I flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on. Beam cut through the darkness, showing the familiar hallway, the coat hooks, the bulletin board with parish announcements. Everything looked normal, but there were no lights. The power was out. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong, because the bells were still ringing. But my mind was slow, sluggish from being woken up, from the cold, from the sheer strangeness of the situation. I walked down the hallway toward the sacristy, where the bell controls are located. My flashlight beam bounced with each step. The building was silent except for the bells and the wind outside. Silent and cold. Without the heating system running, the temperature inside was probably in the 30s. I reached the sacristy, a small room off the chancel area where the clergy robe and where we keep service supplies. The bell control panel is mounted on the wall next to the supply cabinet. I opened the door and shone my light inside. The control panel was dark. No LED indicators, no display screen. Dead. I flipped the switch on the panel anyway, knowing it was pointless. Nothing happened. I opened the panel's front cover to examine the internal electronics. Everything looked intact, no visible damage. But without power, the system couldn't function. And yet the bells were still ringing. I stood there, staring at the dead control panel, listening to the bells peal above me. 4 bells, ringing in sequence, over and over. The pattern was perfect, exactly as it should sound during a call to service. My breath fogged in the cold air. I closed the panel cover and walked out of the sacristy, through the chancel, into the nave. The nave was vast and dark, my flashlight beam barely making a dent in the shadows. The pews stretched in rows toward the entrance. The stained glass windows were just black rectangles now, no light coming through them. Above, the vaulted ceiling disappeared into darkness. And somewhere high above that, in the bell tower, the bells continued their impossible ringing. I tried to think it through logically. The bell system is electronic. It requires power. We don't have a battery backup for the bells. There's no reason we would. When the power goes out, the bells don't ring. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. During the ice storm of 2015, we lost power for 3 days. The bells were silent the entire time, but these bells were not silent. I walked down the center aisle toward the narthex, toward the door that leads to the tower stairs. My footsteps echoed. The bells rang. I reached the tower door and tried the handle. Locked. I had to set down my flashlight to fish out my keys, find the right one, unlock it. My hands were clumsy in the cold. The door swung open, revealing a narrow spiral staircase climbing up into blackness. The bell tower is one of the oldest parts of the church, original to the 1847 construction. The stairs are stone, worn smooth by generations of feet. They spiral up for 90 feet before reaching the bell chamber. I've been up there maybe a dozen times in 16 years, usually to inspect for water damage or bird nests. It's not a climb I enjoy. The stairs are steep, the space is claustrophobic, and the higher you go, the more you feel the building sway in the wind. I started climbing, my flashlight pointed upward. The bells were louder now, their sound reverberating down the stone shaft. The stairs wound up and up, a tight spiral. I counted steps out of habit, the way I always do. 30 steps, 50, 70. The sound of the bells was overwhelming, filling my ears, vibrating in my chest. At 93 steps, I reached the intermediate landing, a small platform where the old rope and wheel mechanisms used to be housed. There's a small window here, just a slit really, looking out over the village. I paused to catch my breath, shone my light out the window. All I could see was darkness and blowing snow. The bells rang directly above me now, powerful and deafening. I continued up the final flight of stairs. Another 27 steps, narrower and more treacherous than the first section. The bell chamber door was at the top, a heavy wooden thing with iron hinges. I pushed it open and stepped into the chamber. The cold hit me first. The bell chamber is open to the elements on all four sides. Tall, Gothic arch openings, designed to let the sound carry. The wind roared through the space, driving snow in horizontal sheets. My flashlight beam swept across the chamber. I saw the four bells, massive bronze things suspended from a steel framework. The largest bell, the tenor, weighs almost 2,000 pounds. The others range from 800 to 1,200 pounds each. They were all perfectly still, not moving, not swinging, not ringing. But I could still hear them. The sound surrounded me, impossibly loud, the full peal echoing in the stone chamber. But the bells themselves hung motionless. I stood there, frozen, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. I walked closer, shining my light on each bell in turn. They were stationary. The metal was cold, covered in a thin layer of frost. I reached out and touched the nearest bell, the smallest one. The bronze was like ice against my glove. It wasn't vibrating. It wasn't moving at all. The sound continued. 4 bells, perfect sequence, calling phantom worshippers to a Christmas service that didn't exist. I backed away, my heart pounding now. This wasn't an equipment malfunction. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a wrench or a circuit tester. This was something else, something I had no framework for understanding. I turned and hurried back to the door, back to the stairs, and started down as fast as I dared. The bells rang behind me, their phantom sound chasing me down the spiral. I took the stairs too fast, nearly lost my footing twice, caught myself on the stone walls. My breathing was ragged, fogging the air. I burst out of the tower door into the nave, pulled the door shut behind me, and stood there gasping. The bells were muffled now, but still audible, still ringing their impossible pattern. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this building, get home, figure this out in daylight, with the storm past and the power back on. This wasn't something to deal with at 4 a.m. in the dark. I started back toward the side entrance, walking quickly through the nave. That's when I noticed the footprints. My flashlight beam caught them as I crossed the transept. Wet footprints on the stone floor, leading from the side entrance deeper into the church. I stopped, shone my light along their path. They were recent. The water was still visible, not yet evaporated. Boot prints looked alike, larger than mine. They led down the side aisle, past the pews, toward the altar. Someone else was in the building. "Hello?" My voice sounded small in the vast space. "This is Vincent Harlow, church maintenance. Who's there?" No answer, just the bells and the wind. I followed the footprints, my unease growing with each step. They were deliberate, purposeful, not wandering. They led straight up the side aisle, past the pulpit, right up to the altar rail. And there they stopped, just stopped, as if the person had walked to that exact point and then vanished. I shone my light around the chancel area. No one there. The footprints didn't lead anywhere else, didn't turn around, didn't head off in another direction. They just ended at the altar rail. "Hello? I know someone's here. Please identify yourself." Silence. I walked up to the altar rail, examining the floor more carefully. The footprints were clear up to the rail, then nothing. The floor beyond was dry. I looked up at the altar itself, the large brass cross, the arrangement of poinsettias left over from the Christmas Eve services. Everything was in place, nothing disturbed. A thought occurred to me. Maybe someone had come in seeking shelter from the storm, heard me coming, and was hiding. It was a reasonable explanation. I checked the sacristy again. Empty. I checked the side chapel. Empty. I even checked the choir room and the storage closets. No one. The building was freezing now, my breath coming in thick clouds. I was shivering despite my heavy coat. The bells rang on. I made my way back to the side entrance, intending to leave, to deal with this in the morning. But when I reached the door and pushed on it, it wouldn't open. I pushed harder. The door was solid, unyielding. I checked the lock. It was still unlocked on the inside. The deadbolt retracted. But the door wouldn't budge. I put my shoulder into it, shoving hard. Nothing. Snow, I thought. The drifts had probably piled against the door while I was inside, blocking it. That had to be it. I tried the front entrance instead, walking back through the nave to the main doors. These are double doors, heavy oak with iron hardware. I unlocked them and pushed. They didn't move either. I pushed harder, using all my strength. The doors were completely stuck. I could hear the wind howling outside, but the doors wouldn't open even an inch. I went to one of the side windows, tried to look out. All I could see was snow pressed against the glass. The drifts must be enormous, I thought. The storm must have piled snow against every entrance. But that didn't feel right. I've seen bad snowstorms before. I've seen drifts 10, 12 feet high. But in all my years here, I've never been completely unable to open a door. There's always some give, some movement. This was like the doors were sealed shut. I pulled out my phone to call for help. No signal. That wasn't unusual. Cell reception in the church has always been spotty, and the stone walls block most signals. But I couldn't get a single bar. I tried calling anyway. Nothing. The call wouldn't connect. The bells continued their steady rhythm above me. I forced myself to calm down, to think. I had my flashlight, which was good for another few hours. I had my phone, even if it wasn't getting reception. I had my coat and gloves. I wasn't in immediate danger. The storm would pass. The power would come back on. Someone would come by. Reverend Clemens, probably, checking on the building once the roads cleared. I just needed to wait. I went back to the side entrance, thinking I'd try once more to clear the door. As I approached, my flashlight beam fell on the floor. The wet footprints were still there, leading in from the entrance. But now there was another set leading back. I stopped, staring. When I'd followed the prints earlier, they'd only gone one direction, in. Now there was a clear path. One set coming in, one set going back out. Both ending at the door. I hadn't seen anyone leave. I hadn't heard anyone leave. I'd been in the building the entire time, and there was only one exit I'd used. This isn't funny, I said aloud, though I didn't know who I was talking to. I'm the maintenance worker here. I have a right to be in this building. If someone's playing a prank, it's not appreciated. The bells rang. The wind howled. No one answered. I examined the returning footprints more closely. They were identical to the first set. Same boot tread, same size, same depth. As if the same person had walked to the altar and then walked back out. But I hadn't seen anyone. I'd been here the whole time. Unless they'd left while I was in the bell tower. That had to be it. While I was climbing the stairs, dealing with the impossible ringing bells, someone else had been down here. They'd done whatever they came to do and left. Somehow forced open one of the doors despite the snow, then forced it shut again behind them. That explained the footprints. It didn't explain how they'd left without me hearing them. It didn't explain why the doors wouldn't open now. And it definitely didn't explain the bells. I decided to check the basement. If the power was out, maybe I could at least figure out why. Maybe a breaker had tripped, or the main line had come down in the storm. I headed to the basement door, unlocked it, and started down the wooden stairs. The air grew colder with each step. My flashlight beam revealed the familiar space, stone walls, concrete floor, the hulking shape of the boiler. The boiler was silent. That made sense without power. But something else was off. The basement felt different, too quiet. too still, like the air pressure had changed. I've spent hundreds of hours in this basement over the years, and I know how it should feel. This wasn't right. I walked over to the electrical panel, shining my light on it. All the breakers were in the off position, not tripped, off, as if someone had methodically turned off every circuit in the building. I stared at the panel, confused. These breakers hadn't been off when I'd checked them last night. I'd made a note specifically. All systems normal. Had someone come down here and turned them off? Why would anyone do that? I reached out to flip the main breaker back on, then hesitated. Standard safety protocol. Before restoring power after an outage, you check for damage. Make sure there's no reason the power went out, if there's a short or a fault somewhere. Turning the power back on could cause a fire or worse. But I'd checked the system last night. Everything had been fine, and right now, I wanted lights. I wanted heat. I wanted normalcy. I flipped the main breaker. Nothing happened. The panel stayed dark. I tried the other breakers one by one. None of them would stay in the on position. They'd flip on for a second, then click back to off, as if something was preventing them from engaging. I tried the main breaker again, holding it firmly in place. It resisted, vibrating under my grip, and then wrenched itself back to the off position so hard it nearly caught my fingers. I stepped back, breathing hard. The bells rang on above me, their sound filtering down through the floor. My flashlight beam wavered as my hand started shaking. This wasn't a normal power outage. This wasn't a problem I could fix with tools and training. I needed to get out of this building. I went back upstairs, moving quickly now. I returned to the side entrance and examined the door more carefully. The lock was still open. The hinges were intact. There was no visible obstruction. But when I pushed, the door was absolutely solid. I might as well have been pushing against a concrete wall. I tried the front doors again. Same result. I went to every door I could find, the delivery entrance, the emergency exits, even the door to the old coal chute that we never use. All of them locked, stuck, or otherwise immovable. I was sealed inside St. Matthias Church on Christmas morning with phantom bells ringing in the tower and no way to call for help. The temperature continued to drop. I could see my breath now in thick plumes. My feet were starting to go numb, despite my boots. I needed to find a way to stay warm. I went to the parish hall, where we keep blankets and supplies for emergency shelter situations. The door to the hall was in the narthex, past the tower entrance. As I approached, I heard something. Not the bells. Something else. A voice, singing. Faint, barely audible under the sound of the bells and wind. A hymn, I realized. "O come, all ye faithful." A woman's voice, high and clear, singing the first verse. I stopped, listening. The voice came from inside the nave, somewhere near the front. I turned and shone my flashlight toward the altar. The light barely reached that far, but I could make out the shape of the pews, the pulpit, the altar rail, and someone standing at the altar. My heart seized. I could see her, or the outline of her, in the dim backscatter of my flashlight. A woman in what looked like a long dress or robe. She was facing the altar, her back to me, singing, "O come, let us adore him. O come, let us adore him." "Excuse me," I called out, my voice cracking. "Ma'am, the church is closed. You need to leave." She continued singing, not acknowledging me at all. I started walking down the center aisle toward her, my flashlight beam focused on her figure. She was tall, slender, her dress or robe reaching the floor. She stood perfectly still except for the slight movement of her shoulders as she sang. As I got closer, I could see details. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down her back. Her hands were clasped in front of her. "Ma'am, I'm the church maintenance worker. I need to know how you got in here." She finished the verse and fell silent. The bells rang above us. The wind shrieked outside. She didn't turn around. I was maybe 20 feet away now, close enough to see that her dress was old-fashioned, like something from a historical photograph. Long sleeves, high collar, dark fabric. Close enough to see that she cast no shadow despite my flashlight shining directly on her. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper now. "Please turn around." She did. I can't describe her face. I've tried in the days since to remember what I saw when she turned to face me. But there's nothing. No features, no expression. Not a blur or a shadow, but an absence. As if that part of reality had been cut out and replaced with nothing. She took a step toward me. I stumbled backward, nearly fell over a pew. My flashlight swung wildly. When the beam found her again, she was gone. Just gone. The space where she'd been standing was empty. I swept the light across the chancel, the nave, the side aisles. Nothing. But I could still hear singing. Fainter now, coming from somewhere else. The side chapel, maybe. Or the choir room. Multiple voices now, overlapping. Different hymns. Silent night. Hark the herald angels sing. Joy to the world. All at once, a discordant mixture that shouldn't have been possible. Men and women and children singing in the dark church, invisible. And the bells. Always the bells. I backed away toward the narthex, toward the tower door, not sure where I was going but needing to move. The singing grew louder as I moved, as if the sources were getting closer. I could hear footsteps now too, echoing on the stone floor. Multiple sets, coming from different directions. But my flashlight revealed nothing, just empty pews and shadows. I ducked into the parish hall, pulling the door closed behind me. The room was dark and cold, tables and chairs stacked against the walls. The kitchen area shut down for the holiday. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, listening. The singing continued outside, muffled by the door, but still audible. Hymn after hymn, overlapping, never ending. I tried my phone again, still no signal. I checked the time, 4:52 a.m. I'd been in the church for an hour. It felt like days. I stayed in the parish hall for a long time, maybe 30 minutes, trying to work up the courage to leave. Eventually, the singing faded. The bells continued, but the voices stopped. I cracked the door open and looked out into the narthex. Empty. Silent except for the bells. I stepped out cautiously, shining my flashlight around. No one. I moved through the nave again, checking the pews, the chancel, the sacristy. The building was empty, or at least I couldn't see anyone. The wet footprints were still by the side entrance, but no new ones had appeared. I tried the doors again, still sealed. I went to the largest window I could find, one of the ground floor windows in the parish hall, and attempted to break it with a chair. The chair bounced off the glass without making a mark. I tried again, harder. The glass didn't even crack. I might as well have been hitting it with a pillow. I was trapped, sealed inside St. Matthias Church, with whatever was happening here. The bells rang on. Time became strange after that. I kept checking my phone, watching the minutes tick by, but it didn't feel real. I wandered the building, trying to stay warm, trying to stay calm. I found candles in the sacristy and lit them, more for the psychological comfort than for the light. I wrapped myself in blankets from the parish hall. I sat in a pew near the front and tried to pray, though I'm not particularly religious. I'm here for the job, not the faith. But at that moment, I prayed. Around 6:30, according to my phone, I heard voices again. Not singing this time, talking. A murmur of conversation, like people gathering before a service. I looked up from my pew and saw them. The nave was full. Hundreds of people, sitting in the pews, standing in the aisles. Men and women and children, all dressed in old-fashioned clothing from different eras. Victorian dresses and suits, 1920s flapper styles, 1950s Sunday best. They flickered in and out of visibility, translucent one moment and solid the next. They didn't look at me. They faced the altar, waiting. A man in a clerical collar appeared at the pulpit. Not Reverend Clemens, an older man with white hair and a severe expression. He opened a hymnal and began to speak, but no sound came out. His lips moved, his hands gestured, but I heard nothing except the bells. The congregation stood. They held hymnals that hadn't been there a moment before. They opened them in unison and began to sing. "O come, all ye faithful," again, the same hymn I'd heard the woman sing. But this time it was a full choir, harmonizing, powerful. And still the bells rang their pattern, perfectly timed with the singing. I sat frozen in my pew, watching this phantom Christmas service unfold around me. The congregation sang through all 6 verses. Then they sat, and the old minister preached his silent sermon. Then they stood for another hymn. The service continued, following the traditional liturgy I'd seen Reverend Clemens perform hundreds of times. But these people weren't from our time. They were from the church's past, all of its past, different decades layered on top of each other. At some point during the service, I noticed someone sitting next to me, an elderly woman in a dark blue dress, lace collar, her gray hair pulled back in a bun. She held a hymnal and was singing along with the others. She turned and looked at me, really looked at me, and smiled. Her eyes were kind. She reached over and patted my hand, the way you might comfort a frightened child. Her hand was freezing cold. Then she faded, just dissolved into nothing, and I was alone in the pew again. The phantom service continued for what felt like hours. The congregation sang, prayed, took communion at the altar rail. Children fidgeted in the pews. Adults bowed their heads in reverence. It was beautiful and terrible at once. When the service finally ended, the minister raised his hands in benediction. The congregation began to file out, walking down the center aisle toward the entrance. They passed right through me. I felt nothing, no cold, no pressure, just a faint sensation of movement. They walked to the doors, through the doors, and vanished. The nave emptied. The bells stopped ringing. The silence was shocking. After hours of constant sound, bells, singing, wind, the absence was almost physical. I sat in the pew, trembling, hardly daring to breathe. Then I heard a different sound, from outside, a car engine, voices. Someone was calling my name. "Vincent! Vincent Harlow!" I ran to the side entrance and pushed on the door. This time it opened easily, swinging out into blinding daylight. The storm had passed. The sun was up, brilliant against fresh snow. Standing in the parking lot was Reverend Clemens, Walter Sims, and 2 state troopers. "Oh, thank God," Reverend Clemens said, hurrying toward me. "We've been trying to reach you. Are you all right?" I stumbled out into the snow, my legs weak. "The bells," I said. "Did you hear the bells?" They all looked at each other. "What bells?" Walter asked. "The church bells. They've been ringing all night, since 3:47. Reverend Clemens frowned. "Vincent, the power's been out since midnight. A transformer blew on Route 14. The whole village has been dark. The bells couldn't have been ringing. But I heard them. I came to turn them off, but the power was out, and they were ringing anyway. I went up to the tower and..." I stopped, seeing the concern on their faces. "I've been trapped in there since 4 a.m. The doors wouldn't open." One of the troopers, a young guy named Thompson, gestured at the building. "We were just doing a welfare check. Someone reported seeing your truck here all night. The doors weren't locked. We walked right in." "That's not possible. I tried every door. They wouldn't budge." They exchanged glances again, the kind of looks people give each other when someone isn't making sense. "Mr. Harlow," the other trooper said, "have you been drinking?" No, There was a service." A Christmas service, hundreds of people, and a woman at the altar. She was singing, and Vincent, Reverend Clemens, put a hand on my arm. "You've been in a freezing building all night. You might be hypothermic. Let's get you to the hospital, get you checked out." They brought me to Ashford General. I spent the day there, being treated for mild hypothermia and exhaustion. The doctor said I was lucky I hadn't been in that cold for longer. They asked me questions, gentle questions, about stress and medication, and whether I'd hit my head. I stopped trying to explain what I'd seen. They clearly thought I'd had some kind of episode. Maybe I did. Maybe the cold and the isolation and the stress of waking up to the bells did something to my mind. Maybe I hallucinated the whole thing. That's the rational explanation. That's what I tell myself. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. They found my maintenance log in my truck, read my last entry from Christmas Eve. Everything normal. No reason to think I was having a mental breakdown. My record was spotless. 16 years of reliable service. So after a few days of rest, I was cleared to return to work. I went back to St. Matthias on December 30th. The building was bright and warm, the heating system running fine. The power had been restored. The Christmas decorations were still up. Poinsettias on the altar, garland on the railings. Everything normal. Except I couldn't make myself go into the nave. I stood in the narthex, looking at the empty pews, the sunlight streaming through the stained glass, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I made it through that day, barely. I checked the boiler, replaced a burned-out bulb in the parish hall, avoided the nave as much as possible. That evening, I went to Reverend Clemens's office and gave my notice. 2 weeks. She tried to talk me out of it, told me I'd been through a trauma and shouldn't make big decisions right away. But I knew I couldn't stay in that building. During my last 2 weeks, I did some research. I went through the church archives, old records, going back to the founding in 1847. I learned that St. Matthias has a long history of strange occurrences. Reports of bells ringing when they shouldn't. Sightings of congregation members long dead. A minister in 1923 who claimed to have held a service for ghosts. Most of it was dismissed as superstition or misunderstanding. But there was one entry that caught my attention. A maintenance log from 1954, written by a man named Carl Dreyfus. He described an incident almost identical to mine. Christmas night, power out, bells ringing, phantom congregation. He wrote that he'd been trapped in the church until dawn, witnessing what he called a service outside of time. He quit the next month. There were others, scattered through the decades. Always around Christmas. Always the bells. Always witnesses who left shortly after. I finished my 2 weeks and left St. Matthias. They hired a new maintenance worker, a younger guy named Jordan. I met him once during the transition. Nice kid. I almost warned him about what might happen, but what would I say? Sometimes the ghosts of 170 years of Christmas services all happen at once. He'd think I was insane. Maybe I am. I got a job maintaining a warehouse now. No history, no ghosts. Just HVAC units and loading docks. It's boring, it pays less, but I sleep better. Though sometimes, on cold winter nights, I think I hear bells in the distance, and I wonder if Jordan has heard them too. If he's standing in that dark nave right now, watching the past bleed through into the present, wondering why he can't leave. I hope not. I really do. But I know St. Matthias. I know what it does, and I know that come next Christmas, those bells will ring again.